Welcome to this public meeting of the ECR's Migration Policy Group. During today's meeting, interpretation will be provided in English, Spanish, Italian, Polish, French, and Romanian. Colleagues, what on earth is going on in Britain? Home of the Magna Carta, the world's oldest parliamentary democracy, and yet today, parents are arrested for private WhatsApp messages about their child's school. Mass migration is overwhelming towns and cities. Free speech is censored, while Islamists preach death to apostates in public. And those calling for a return to common sense are branded the enemy by the Prime Minister. How is this possible? Whatever happened to every man's home is his castle. It's tempting to think these things only happen elsewhere. But Britain shows how fast democratic norms collapse when governments weaponize fear. They cite foreign interference, online harm, or disinformation, then construct censorship regimes that reach far beyond their mandates. And we're seeing the same drift here in the EU. A post by German Police Union Vice Chair Manuel Ostermann warned Germany is on track to become an Islamist-dominated, lawless state by 2050, citing parallels with Britain and calling for an immediate 180-degree policy reversal, was censored on X in the EU. But it could be viewed by anyone with a VPN. The Digital Services Act, presented as a shield against Russian propaganda, is already being used to suppress mainstream European voices. This is mission creep, and it's accelerating. So, what will it take to stop it? What will a reform-led UK government need to do to roll back the censorship regime? What safeguards do we need at EU level to prevent similar abuses? What can be done to stop the tide of mass migration? That's why we've invited Dr. Matt Goodwin. Dr. Goodwin is a political scientist, best-selling author, and one of Britain's most influential public intellectuals. He was formerly professor of politics at the University of Kent and has held senior advisory roles with the UK government, Chatham House, and the Legatum Institute. His Sunday Times bestsellers, National Populism, The Revolt Against Liberal Democracy, and Values, Voice, and Virtue have shaped national discussion on class, culture, and Britain's post-Brexit direction. He has briefed over 400 organizations, including the UK Prime Minister's Office, the US State Department, European Commission, Google, Goldman Sachs, and Deutsche Bank, and is a regular advisor to heads of government across the democratic world. For those of you who are interested in the events in the United Kingdom, I highly recommend mattgoodwin.org, where polling analysis strategy is outlined, and I would say, hopefully, a crystal ball into the future of UK policy. So mattgoodwin.org. I now give the floor to you, Dr. Goodwin.
Well, thank you very much, Charlie. Thank you to the organizers of this event today. Thank you to all of you for attending this discussion. I'm just going to lay out a few facts about the United Kingdom that I think will answer some of Charlie's questions. Why are we experiencing a political realignment, a historic moment in British politics that will, at the next general election, deliver a reform government led by Nigel Farage? by the year 2063, white Britons will be a minority in the United Kingdom. Among the under 40s, that will happen as early as 2050. By the year 2079, people born outside of the United Kingdom and their immediate descendants will represent a majority in the entire United Kingdom. By 2100, the end of this century, 1 in 4 British adults and 1 in 3 British children, unless we change the current direction, will be following Islam. Today, in 2,000 schools in the United Kingdom, a majority of children do not speak English as their main language. Across the United Kingdom, 1 million people, according to the census, do not speak English. Mohammed is the most popular name among children. All of these things give you the answer as to why British politics is in a state of flux. We have an immigration demographic crisis which nobody in Westminster is responding to. And that crisis has 2 key pillars. The first is the illegal migration crisis. According to the Pew Research Centre, we have an estimated 1.2 million illegal migrants operating in the United Kingdom, living and working in the UK today. They are being joined by nearly 200,000 additional illegal migrants arriving on the small boats crossing the Channel from France. Once they have entered the country illegally, they are then being distributed, dispersed by the Labour government. They are being put into the heart of our local communities, next to families, next to schools, next to synagogues, next to children. We don't know who they are. We don't know where they come from. We don't know what they believe. The cost of that dispersal is £5.7 million every day to the British taxpayer. If current trends continue, by the time of the next general election, another 181,000 illegal migrants will enter the UK illegally. They include, for example, the recent case of an Egyptian asylum seeker, a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, who was convicted of making bombs in Egypt, entered the UK illegally, was then put in a 4-star Hilton hotel at the expense of UK taxpayers, was allowed to roam the streets of the UK for 17 months while the government decided whether or not to grant his asylum request, during which time he walked into Hyde Park, London, and raped a woman in that park. I could sit here and give you 100 similar cases to that. The illegal migration crisis is making a mockery of the United Kingdom's claim to be a self-governing, independent, sovereign nation, and it is breaking the social contract between citizens and their democratically elected politicians in Westminster. It is being compounded by the legal migration crisis, which began with Tony Blair in 1997 and was then accelerated by the so-called Conservative Party. Most recently, under Boris Johnson, mass immigration, mass uncontrolled immigration was put on steroids. from 2021, nearly 4 million legal migrants entered the UK under Boris Johnson's liberalisation strategy. 80% of all of that migration came from outside of Europe. 80% from Nigeria, China, Uzbekistan, India, Pakistan. It has fundamentally reshaped the country with no democratic mandate. Nobody voted for that. Nobody asked for that. It was not in any party manifesto. In fact, Boris Johnson promised the opposite in 2019 when he said he would lower the overall numbers. And he did the opposite. To give you a sense of the scale of demographic change in the United Kingdom, I'll give you one fact. In every single year since 1997, in each single year since 1997, there has been more immigration into the UK than there was during the entire period between the Anglo-Saxons in the 5th century and the end of the Second World War. In other words, there was more immigration in each year since Tony Blair came to power, including under the Conservatives, than there was during 1,500 years that separated the Anglo-Saxons from Winston Churchill. That is the scale of change we are witnessing. We have seen more immigration into the UK in the last 4 years than we have seen since records began in 1701. Again, nobody voted for this. Nobody asked for this. The Westminster class will say it's making us richer. It's making us stronger. The evidence on the economics of immigration is now clear. From Finland to Denmark to the Netherlands, and even now the United Kingdom, the Office for Budget Responsibility all say the same thing. The exact kind of migration that we now have in Europe, low wage, low skill, poorly educated, non-European, is making Western economies weaker, not stronger. It is a net fiscal cost. It is not a net benefit. It is imposing enormous costs onto UK taxpayers during what is also the worst cost of living crisis that we have had since the Second World War. The economic problem is one thing, the cultural problem is another. As we have also discovered through the rape gang scandal, the grooming gang scandal, which was the industrial scale rape of hundreds of thousands of British children by Pakistani Muslim gangs who got children addicted to heroin and alcohol and trafficked them from one town to another from the 1960s onwards. An estimated close to 1 million children were sexually abused and raped in this way. And politicians in Westminster said it was Islamophobic to suggest that that scandal was happening. And only recently was the Labour Party, under Keir Starmer, the Labour government, willing to give a national inquiry into that scandal to get those girls the truth and justice that they deserve. That is a symbol of the cultural problem that we have imported into the United Kingdom. It is not only an economic problem. We have imported cultures that are diametrically opposed to the traditions, the values, and the way of life that has traditionally held our country together. The reason millions of people are voting for the Reform Party, which is currently on 35% of the vote, the reason hundreds of thousands of people are marching in the streets. And the reason millions of people are raising the Union and St. George's flag across the United Kingdom as part of a spontaneous protest against their government, one of the most significant protests that my country has seen in many years, is because of the immigration crisis, which raises the obvious question, how do you fix it? How you fix it is you announce an immediate end to mass uncontrolled immigration. The United Kingdom will leave the European Convention on Human Rights. The United Kingdom will repeal Tony Blair's Human Rights Act, which entrenches the ECHR into domestic law. The United Kingdom will move to detain and deport anybody who enters the United Kingdom illegally, processing them offshore, not putting them next to British families, British children, British synagogues, British churches, in the heart of our communities. And the United Kingdom will establish the principle of national preference, namely putting the tax-paying, hard-working, law-abiding majority of British people first. That is what will happen over the next 5 years because of the failure of the Westminster class to actually deliver on the promises it has made to its own people. And while we are doing that, as you may have read over the last 2 weeks in Britain, we will dramatically reshape and reform legal immigration. You will no longer be able to stay in the United Kingdom indefinitely. We will move to a policy of 5-year renewable visas, which will only be renewed if legal migrants can speak English fluently to a high standard, make a net contribution to the economy through taxation and work, do not rely on welfare benefits and social housing that is subsidised by the British taxpayer at the cost of £15 billion over the next decade, and who work and contribute to the economy and have a clean criminal record. The legal migration regime will be completely reshaped. The illegal migration regime will be completely reshaped, because if we do not do it, the social contract in our country will collapse. People will withdraw support for the state, they will withdraw support for welfare, and we will head ever closer to what we saw in the aftermath of the Southport atrocities, which was civil unrest. Nobody wants that to happen. Nobody wants public trust in democracy to collapse. Nobody wants to live in a more divided society. But the answer to the current problem, which I think is a Europe-wide problem, is to regain control of the borders and regain control of the immigration system. And that is why British politics is facing the most significant reset for more than a century. This is the most significant political insurgency since the rise of the Labour Party in the early years of the 1900s. And the Westminster class, when they ask themselves, why is this happening? They only have themselves to blame. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Goodwin, for a sharp and thought-provoking presentation. The realignment that we are seeing in the United Kingdom is coming a bit later than what we've seen on the continent. But I think, well, due to the first past the post system, that when there is a new majority in Westminster, the UK may well take the lead among our free nations. So thank you so much for this. We will now open the floor for questions. Questions will be taken from MEPs only. I would like to thank all MEPs here today from all groups, right of center, which is heartening. And the first one to ask a question is my colleague from the ECR, Alexander Vondra from the Czech Republic.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you for organizing this. It's really excellent. And thank you for coming here. We have met a year ago in Prague in Severo. And thanks again. It was fantastic. Look, my question is this. On this pull-in effect or pull-in side, there is the role of those open-border charities. Do you know, can you tell us something about, financing those institutions? It's the first question. The second, if there is some real possibility to kill that kind of a financing, if there is any, and who is going to finance the open charity business?
Well, the short answer is we have what we would call in the UK a quangocracy. We have an ecosystem of unelected, unaccountable charities, non-governmental associations and bodies that have pushed us into an era of post-democracy, an era in which power has been transferred to organizations that are not directly accountable to citizens. Now, ironically, a lot of that funding has come from taxpayers, especially in places like universities, in places like charities and foundations. And my view, which is not, I'm not representing a particular party, but my personal view would be that the era of taxpayer funding going to organizations that seek to undermine the policies of democratically elected governments has to end. We have to withdraw that funding for organizations that are openly undermining and eroding the legitimacy of democratically elected governments without question. I would like to see a much wider audit of funding within all public sector institutions. The problem we have in the UK, to be specific, is we have another invention by Tony Blair, which was the Equality Act, which has been used to essentially create identity politics, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives across the public sector. Now, the only way you can root out identity politics or woke ideology within those institutions is by overturning the Equality Act. And we've just had 14 years of Conservative government in the UK. But throughout that period, so-called Conservatives consistently failed and refused to deal with the root problem. And the root problem is that the entire legal and judicial architecture of the state has been redesigned by centre-left governments to support their regime and their policy objectives. At no point did Conservatives ever roll back that regime. They didn't deal with the Equality Act. They didn't deal with things like the Human Rights Act. They didn't deal with things like the Supreme Court and the judicial overreach and the lawfare. What I think we now need to see within Europe, more generally, is a generation of parties and politicians who understand that the previous regime has to be completely uprooted. The root cause of that has to be completely dealt with if we're going to have any hope of actually turning the tide. Because in the UK, the key lesson from the United Kingdom is Conservatives failed to overturn the zeitgeist. They didn't even try. And President Trump is starting to do that in the United States. But I think in Europe, we need to understand that unless you're dealing with that root cause, with that legislative architecture, you're not going to bring about the changes that you want to see.
Thank you. And the floor goes to Stephen Bartolitsa from Croatia.
Thank you very much, Charlie, and I appreciate your remarks. I agree that the situation today in Britain is appalling. It's obvious that the elites have failed. The mainstream parties, I think, deservedly are on the way out, and there needs to be clearly change, not just in your country, but throughout Europe. I wanted to address the cultural dimension of what you described. I think some of these root causes go deeper to the point where politics maybe cannot answer them. For example, the marriage culture has diminished. Young people simply do not have the incentive to get married. They don't have the willingness to sacrifice and raise children. It's a very deep problem. Also, abortion. Abortion on demand in Britain. According to some estimates, 25% of Generation Z has been aborted, simply aborted. So unless this is addressed, it seems to me unlikely that things will be reversed. We could imagine even securing the borders and stopping cold migration, but still this inherent weakness remains inside our country. So perhaps you could address this, what Pope John Paul II, he called it the culture of death. I think that Europe is suffering from this, all our nations. We're simply disappearing, and someone has to fill the void. And unfortunately, it seems it's people who have contempt for our domestic cultures and are not eager to integrate. They simply have created parallel societies. Thank you.
So I think there are two key challenges that most European nations face. One is the immigration challenge, demography, but the second is family, and both go hand in hand. The birth rate in my country is forecast to reach 1.3 in the coming years. We have a political class that will not even tolerate a discussion about what a pro-family policy might look like. And when you talk about family policy, it's instantly stigmatized. So I think, having said that, I remain an optimist, because if you look at how quickly the Overton window in the UK and other countries has changed on migration, there's no reason why it cannot change on issues like family policy. We have gone in the space of less than a decade from considering something like leaving the European Union, leaving the European Convention on Human Rights, disapplying the 1951 Refugee Convention, stripping welfare for anybody who is not British, to be, those were considered beyond the pale. Those were considered socially unacceptable policies. In less than a decade, every single one of those things has moved into the mainstream of UK political debate. And in fact, in some cases, in only the last 2 or 3 years. And so the speed at which the Overton window is moving is very quick. So when you talk about the deeper reasons for the malaise, and I agree with you, the collapse of Christianity, the collapse of meaning, we all know what the broad strokes are. I don't need to tell this room that this runs deeper than a government and a set of policies. And that gap has been filled with fake gods, radical woke progressivism, radical Islamism, narcissism, and so on. I don't need to tell this room that, but the question is, what is a practical response to that? Now, what I would like to see, in my country at least, having changed the Overton window on European Union membership, now the ECHR, I think the next thing that has to be challenged head on is pro-family policy and the breakdown of the family unit. What does a successful, effective response to collapsing birth rates across Europe and the West look like? What is the mix of policies that might actually make a difference? How do you reshape the education system, beginning in the early years onwards, whereby children are taught openly what it means to be part of a family, the biology of family formation, and so on and so forth. And I think I would like to see a much more aggressive cultural change in the discussion around family, much like we've seen on a whole host of other policy areas where the consensus has completely changed very quickly, often for the wrong reasons. Take climate change, for example, but that was fundamentally a cultural shift, not just economic. We need a similar shift around family and family formation without question. And we also need, I think, a robust conversation about assimilation, which is what does an effective assimilation policy look like? In my country, I would like to see the debate move to things like banning cousin marriage, banning Sharia courts. We have 85 Sharia courts operating in the United Kingdom. I would like to see charities that have known links to extremist Islamist organizations shut down. The Reform Party is the only political party in Britain that has promised to ban the Muslim Brotherhood. No other political party has been willing to say that in British politics. I would like to see much more scrutiny at what is happening in local communities, within local neighbourhood associations and mosques. There's a very interesting book in the UK called Among the Mosques by Ed Hussein. And he turned up spontaneously at a sample of mosques in the UK. And he makes the point in that book that if you are a young Muslim in Britain, you can go your whole day from waking up in the morning to going to a local school, to going to mosque, to walking around the neighborhood in the evening, to mixing with neighbors and friends, and have no interaction at all with the non-Muslim majority. That should not be happening in any advanced Western nation. So those are the things that we need to tackle head on. It's been 15 years since David Cameron and Nicolas Sarkozy said multiculturalism has failed, and yet still we have no successor. We have no serious policy successor to that in the United Kingdom. In fact, it's so bad at the moment that if I were to say multiculturalism has failed, which it clearly has, that the Westminster class cannot even tolerate that being said. So in some ways, the conversation has gone backwards from where it was 15 years ago. In fact, one Conservative at the moment is under criticism for suggesting that there are places in the United Kingdom where integration isn't working because you don't see any white people. Now, that's a statement of fact. I could take you to those neighborhoods. That should not be controversial. But within the debate that we currently have, it is. So what does an effective assimilation policy look like? And what is the answer to the statement that we will no longer tolerate people who do not tolerate us? What is the response to that in policy terms? What does that look like?
And the next one on the list is Christine Anderson, Germany.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Mr. Goodwin, for this really interesting presentation. What you laid out is what you're trying to do to reshape migration policy. I would consider that makes a lot of sense. It's common sense, even though I'm pretty convinced that Westminster would probably label it as Islamophobe, racist, whatever. However, I really would like to pick your brain on this one. And it's quite interesting, actually, that you just quoted someone who said 15 years ago that multiculturalism has failed. Well, guess what? Angela Merkel, she said it in like 2002 or 2003. And now, we had the results. Anyhow, and I would really like to pick your brain on that one. We are seeing this illegal immigration, which I actually call illegal mass invasion at this point, because that's what it actually is. We are seeing that not only in Great Britain, not only in Germany, we are seeing it pretty much in every single Western democracy. And to me, it seems like I said, anyone with two brain cells, intact brain cells, would see where this will lead. In Germany, we're talking, we're having like these random knife attacks, no longer happening on a daily basis, but an hourly basis. So 13, 14, 15 random knife attacks every single day in Germany. So anyone who would have wanted to see it could have seen that. Why is it that Westminster, that in the Bundeskanzleramt in Germany, or even anywhere, you name it. I mean, these people are no idiots. They must see it too, and they must know it too. What do you think drives them to continue with that detrimental immigration policy, knowing fully well what the effects will be? And I would certainly like to, I don't expect you to have an answer, but please, some speculation might actually help to get a clear mind on that.
Well, you mentioned one word, Islamophobia. And to give you a sense of what's going on in the UK, consider this. The Labour government, the socialist government under Keir Starmer, is currently fast-tracking a new definition of Islamophobia. If you want to look at the definition that they're putting forward, which was suggested in 2018, signed off by Labour MPs, David Lammy, Shabana Mahmood, who is now in charge of our borders and our counter-terrorism strategy, that definition said these three things could be considered Islamophobic. Discussing and debating the Pakistani Muslim rape gangs could be considered Islamophobic. Discussing Muslim entryism into institutions. If anybody has read the founding statement of the Muslim Brotherhood, they will know that this was created with the specific aim of infiltrating Western institutions through non-violent means. But that would be considered Islamophobic, discussing that. And third, discussing the demographic rise or spread of Islam in a negative way, let's say suggesting it might be negative for women's rights, it might be negative for the separation of powers between church and state, it might be negative for individual rights, etc. That could be considered Islamophobic. Now, that definition, even though the Labour government is saying it will not be legally binding, that definition will then be imposed on our taxpayer-funded public institutions, which, as we all know, having worked with those institutions, they will adopt that definition and they will impose that definition top-down on our schools, universities, healthcare, and more. So this is an example of how what we might call the censorship industrial complex is working to try and police the parameters of what can and cannot be debated. So it is a very conscious strategy. Another example in the United Kingdom would be something called non-crime hate incidents. Let me say that again, non-crime hate incidents. An example of a non-crime hate incident would be if you leave this room today and you walk down to the drinks reception and you say on the way, Matt Goodwin just offended me, which is unlikely in this room, and you call the police will call me and they will say, a black mark has been put against your name, a non-crime hate incident has been filed against you. You do not need to provide the police with any evidence. If I then go for a job at a public sector organization and they do a background check on me, they could see that a non-crime hate incident has been filed against me. You might say, Matt, you're exaggerating the scale of the problem. 250,000 non-crime hate incidents have been filed in the UK over the last few years. They have involved police officers arresting parents for complaining about their school in a WhatsApp group. We've just had a comedian, Graham Linehan, who was arrested at an airport by 5 armed police officers for criticising transgender ideology. And friends of mine in journalism, such as Alison Pearson, have been visited by police because they have violated the new speech codes. So when I see Keir Starmer saying to President Trump and Vice President JD Vance that we do not have a free speech problem in the United Kingdom, I would suggest that he is lying to people outside of the United Kingdom, because we most definitely do. I'm especially concerned about the Islamophobia definition being used as a blasphemy law, which is clearly designed to shut down debate about Islam, and it is being pushed through alongside a broader policy regime that we might call two-tier multiculturalism, which says you can celebrate every identity, every religion, every set of values, every way of life, except your own. And this is all part of reshaping Western identities, Western traditions, around a universal liberal celebration of diversity. So in the end, there's actually nothing distinctive about us at all. We have no history, and we have no values. We have no identity, because it's been repackaged as globalist mush. An example of this in the UK was a 12-year-old girl, very prominent case. She attended her school's Culture Day, a day to celebrate culture, wearing a Union Jack dress, a dress with a Union flag. And when she arrived at school, she was taken into a side room and she was told to call her father, and she was told to go home because that was the wrong culture to celebrate. So I would suggest to you the reason across the United Kingdom right now, millions of people are flying Union and St. George's flags. If you go outside of London, if you go into Northern England, you will never see as many flags in your life. It's not just because they are showing their national pride, which they are. It is because it is an act of resistance. That is what it is. It is an act of resistance against a policy of two-tier multiculturalism. Roger Scruton, the English philosopher, once said, "A nation is not a set of legal documents. A nation is your home, defined by a shared culture, shared identity, and shared way of life." And millions of people have now reached the conclusion that our politicians are destroying their home. And they've had enough, clearly.
So mentioning the Islamophobia word provides me with the opportunity to give you a heads up of a report that I have commissioned two scholars, Florence Berchaud-Blackler and Tommaso Virgili. I have asked them to produce a report on EU support for Islamism, which continues to be a problem, and the prevalence of the word Islamophobia is increasing in the EU institutions. So we will put the limelight on that problem, and you're all most welcome to the forthcoming seminar on that topic. I think it's very timely with regards to the censorship regime on criticism against the religion of Islam that is being imposed right now in the United Kingdom. So now the floor goes to Mark Young, MEP for Germany.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you for your brilliant speech. When the Brexit happened, we all thought now the UK is doing better, is heading towards a better future than probably the rest of Europe. And we were shocked to see that it was not so, and it was even some developments are even worse than in Europe. So, but all the more refreshing is what you are telling us here, because it's getting so clearly to the point and to the core of the problem, which obviously is the demographics. And even though the numbers you are telling us are really shocking, and the facts from your country. But my question goes in this direction also of demographics. So even if all happens so as you promised, and if the Reform Party succeeds in that way, which we all hope, it will still remain a huge challenge to change this direction of history, you could say. So would you agree that somehow the support of some immigrants, like well integrated and those who have become already UK citizens, will be necessary to make this policy successful? Will you agree with that? And if yes, what is the strategy to get the support of these integrated immigrants? Or would you say that's not necessary, we can do it with our home forces or whatever. Thank you.
Well, the first thing to say is that Reform, on current polling, as of this morning, Reform is on 35% of the national vote. The Labour government is already the most unpopular government in the history of polling. And Keir Starmer is the most unpopular Prime Minister in the history of polling. He is about as popular in my country as Meghan Markle. And not far off Prince Andrew, but anyway. The issue that is going to be absolutely key is pulling together a cross-class coalition of people. And what you often find in the polling and the evidence is that legal migrants are often among the most supportive of the changes, because what they can see is what everybody else can see, which is that the principle of fairness, respecting the rule of law, is being consistently violated by people who are not playing by the rules. Almost all of the policies that I've discussed, ending mass uncontrolled immigration, controlling the borders, doing whatever is necessary to fix the illegal migration crisis, putting British people first. This is not like Brexit. This is not 52 versus 48. This is 80 versus 20 in our favour, which is why the Westminster class are so worried about reform and why they are now panicking by using the usual words to try and delegitimize that political party, because they can see that this is very, very different from Brexit, that the dividing line is much more in our favour. And it extends across generation. The young are almost as supportive of immigration restrictions as the old. The idea that the young are woke and the old are conservative is fashionable but misleading. It is not actually true. And large numbers of minority voters endorse these policies as well. What happened after Brexit, to be blunt, is that we inherited the levers that you would need to regain control and reshape our nation. But the Conservative Party, principally under Boris Johnson and then Rishi Sunak, did not really share the majority vision of Brexit that was endorsed by voters. What they held was a globalist vision of Brexit, which is paradoxical, but is a vision of Brexit they held, which was about reconnecting our country with the days of empire, with India, with Pakistan, with non-European migration. And they didn't see that this was at root a project that was focused on reclaiming national sovereignty, lowering migration, and slowing the pace of demographic change. So I'm not actually worried about who supports these policies or not, because they have widespread majority support. What I'm more worried about is to what extent will the state go to stop the Reform Party and others from implementing a counter-cultural programme of government. How will the House of Lords respond to a manifesto that is filled with policies that members of the House of Lords oppose? How will the blob, the judiciary, the legal system respond? How will the quangocracy respond? And how will legacy media respond? And my working assumption is not well. So I think the first phase will be a prolonged battle with the state to reconfigure the state so that these policies can actually be enacted. But once they are enacted, real change will come. If you look at why we cannot deport foreign criminals, ECHR, Article 3, Article 8. If you look at why we cannot control our borders, ECHR, Article 3 and Article 8, and Tony Blair's Human Rights Act. All of these things now need to be removed. And I would say across Europe, the post-war asylum architecture, the post-war asylum human rights regime is no longer fit for purpose. It's not just us saying it, it's many countries in this room, many people saying the same thing, but we need to, I think, speak very loudly and in a unified way that we cannot now operate in the same world that these laws, these conventions were designed to organize in 1945. It's simply absurd. And the quicker we can all get to that point of saying we need to radically tear up and reshape that settlement and get rid of those conventions, I think the easier it will be for us to regain control of our sovereign nations.
So 4 MEPs are on the list right now. I will close it. So one more, and then we close the list because we're running out of time. Lots of questions here. And the next one is to be posed by my colleague from Sweden, Beatrice Timgren.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation. UK and Sweden have something in common, unfortunately, high amount of immigrants. In Sweden, we have a new government that try to do something to turn the direction, to reduce the immigrants, but still some part of Sweden, the majority of the population, they are immigrants or second generation immigrants, and the Muslim Brotherhood, they still infiltrate and continues to exert to influence in Sweden. Do you have any major advice for us in Sweden? And what do you think about the future for UK and also for Sweden? Do you think it's possible to turn it, or do you think it's already too late? Thank you.
Well, of course, it's possible to change the direction of travel because everything that we're talking about reflects specific political decisions and choices that were made in previous regimes. So I'm having lived through something like the decision for Brexit, for example, the capacity of our countries to deliver radical reform, if we want to pursue it, or witnessing the decisions that are being taken by the Trump administration, is a reminder that, of course, we can make a different set of political decisions and choices. I think the similarity between Sweden and the UK, I think, as I've mentioned, is not just about mass migration, but is also failure of integration and a specific challenge from Islamism. And Sweden, I think, has a more challenging task in that respect, looking at the forecasts of where Sweden will be in 2050 and 2060, according to the Pew Research Center. It's going to be a very challenging situation. But of course, there are lots of things that you could do that we've alluded to throughout this conversation: ending the policy of mass uncontrolled immigration, investing much more aggressively in pro-family policies, changing the cultural consensus within the national conversation, enacting a strong clampdown on Islamist influence and organizational reach through charities, mosques, cultural networks, foreign funding, and so on and so on. These are all things that could be done. Banning visas from predominantly Islamic nations, as President Trump has done. These are all potential policy options that are on the table. My frustration is that, say, in my country, we are 20 years on from the 7/7 bombings across London. We have an estimated 40,000 extremist Islamists in the United Kingdom, according to the security services. 75% of all cases that the intelligence services are looking at are Islamist. The vast majority of terrorist attacks have been Islamist. And yet the political conversation would have you believe that this threat is somehow comparable with other forms of extremism, which isn't true. And the other thing that you quickly notice if you go through the list of perpetrators, take, for example, last week's attack in Manchester, same story, the son of Syrians, only recently come to the country, I've looked at the last 20 years of terrorist attacks and wrote on this last week. The vast majority of terrorists, of Islamist terrorists in the UK were either first generation or second generation migrants, usually of Pakistani, Syrian or Libyan heritage, who can only trace their links in the country back one generation. We could be adopting a much tougher response with regards to dealing with that issue through assimilation and policies that deal with that head on. The narrative of homegrown Islamists, for example, is ridiculous because we don't actually really have homegrown terrorists. What we have are Islamists coming within very tight cultural networks, within communities that are refusing to integrate and are not being assimilated into our culture and our way of life, which needs to change urgently.
And now the floor goes to Patryk Jaki, who is MEP for Poland and co-chair of the ECR group.
First of all, thank you very much, and I really appreciate what Charlie did. He organized something which we can call no crime hate incident. So thank you so much. We are very appreciated, and it was very interesting what you said. I am very happy that you mentioned Sir Roger Scruton. He was the creator of the notion of oikophobia. So this is something which the leftists and multiculturalism is spreading around the European Union as well. So if we are talking about the backing to the roots, we should back to our to the notions like the patriotism, like Roger Scruton said. So this is my first remark. Maybe you can little bit elaborate about this. But the most important thing you described, that the state institution was seized by the left, especially the legal system. We know how it works. They are using a judicial branch to using force against us. And my question is, do you have an idea how we can solve this issue? Because even if the Nigel Farage became a prime minister, it wouldn't be easy to restore legal system, especially your legal system, where is a big difference between our continental legal system. Maybe you have idea. It could be interesting for us. Thank you so much.
Well, the first comment about Roger Scruton, I think, was spot on. He also talked about something called the culture of repudiation, in that we now have a ruling class in the West that largely defines itself by repudiating, by rejecting our established identity, our established culture, and our established way of life. Now, what Sir Roger Scruton argued was the opposite of the culture of repudiation, was the culture of affirmation, which is affirming our distinctive identity, affirming our sense of collective memory, and affirming our distinctive way of life. And I think that is, at a broad level, what we are trying to get towards, which is institutions, governments, political parties, educational institutions that are affirming who we are, not continuously undermining it. But yeah, as ever, he was well ahead of the curve. In terms of the judicial system, look, the one thing I would say is I come from a country that was defined by its commitment to common law, and that was defined by its commitment to equality before the law. And now, prior to 1997, that continuous legal tradition was strong and entrenched. The Blairite revolution that started in 1997 marked a fundamental break from that tradition, where power, authority, and legitimacy increasingly went to supranational institutions like this one, the European courts, the Supreme Court in the UK, and an activist legal system. So the solution will be different from one country to the next. But in my country, the solution in the UK is leave the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights, repeal Tony Blair's Human Rights Act, return to the principle, to the system of common law, reaffirm the commitment to equality before the law. I'll just give you one example of how that tradition has been hijacked. The Labour government, Labour politicians recently encouraged an unelected legal body called the Sentencing Council to impose new guidelines on the judicial system, which would have seen people from minority backgrounds receive more lenient sentences than people from the majority. And this sparked an intense national debate about what we call two-tier justice, where if you belong to a sexual, racial, or religious minority, those factors would be taken into account when sentencing. Now, that is a direct violation of equality before the law, but it is an example of how Blair's regime has been used to institutionalize identity politics into the legal system. Meanwhile, we have dozens of judges who are known to be linked to Open Borders charities who have become openly politicized. So we need to really oversee a factory reset of the legal criminal justice system. We need to get back to equality before the law. We need to ensure that the legal system remains independent and is not openly politicized. And we need to ensure that unelected, unaccountable organizations like the Sentencing Council and others are not able to influence the legal system. Now, all of those things can be done with a government that believes in them. But at the moment, we don't have governments that believe in that tradition of equality before the law and an independent legal justice system. But we can get there if we want to.
Thank you. And now the floor goes to Branko Grims from Slovenia.
Thank you very much. First, thank you for this really excellent presentation and also debate. I enjoyed every second. So to be short, because we are running out of time, two words: integration and assimilation. I don't believe in each one of these two words. I only believe in what has put Donald Trump on the top of his program, and that's remigration. Because if we don't do it, Europe has already been lost. You have excellently described what will happen in 10, 20, 30 years, and the situation is getting worse every year. So what is your opinion about remigration, how we can do it, that it can be done? We can go and see in the United States, because what Donald Trump is doing at this moment is a miracle. And a miracle which defends the Western civilization. It's our opportunity and our duty to do the same, from my point of view. Thank you very much.
Well, the first point I would make, and I've had a similar discussion about this very point today, about the importance of language and not adopting words and concepts that are designed to undermine the unity and the sustainability of Western nations. Integration is one of those words. Some of the work that I've been influenced by is a book called The Culture Transplant by Garrett Jones. It's a very interesting book if you get a chance to read it. What he argues is that mass migration is not really just the movement of people, but it is the movement of cultures. And what we are doing across much of the West is importing cultures that are fundamentally incompatible with the culture that has created the prosperous nations that we have grown up with and our parents and their parents have grown up with. And we need to, I think, take a step back and think very seriously about which groups is it possible to assimilate, if at all, and which groups is it not. What I would like to see, my personal opinion in the United Kingdom, I'm not wedded to particular terms like the one that you mentioned, but what I would like to see is the immediate removal of an estimated 1.3, 1.4 million illegal migrants from the country, the removal of an estimated 12 or 13,000 foreign criminals in our UK prisons, which are now so full that we are releasing sexual predators and rapists early because we do not have room for them in our prisons, but we have 12, 13,000 foreign criminals in them. And I would like to see the reshaping of our legal migration system, as I mentioned, whereby people who arrive in the UK legally are not given the ability to remain indefinitely while not learning the language, while not contributing to the economy, while committing crime, and while taking welfare benefits. In other words, I want a completely different policy regime put in place that actively discourages the kind of migration that is now flooding into Europe on a massive scale. Those changes in themselves would make a very quick, tangible difference, I think, to Western nations. What happens after that, I think, is up for discussion, up for debate. How you incentivize assimilation among groups that have so far remained resistant to that, I don't think anybody yet has an answer to that. I think people are beginning to think about it, but I don't think anybody quite has come up with an answer to that. But I would like to see a policy regime that makes it crystal clear that at a bare minimum, if you enter a country illegally, you are not staying. If you enter a country legally, you are not staying forever unless a much tighter set of criteria are met. And that is about encouraging compatibility and assimilation and being quite assertive about it. And you are living in a policy regime that is very public in the statement that it is not going to tolerate groups that do not integrate into public life, do not assimilate into public life, do not actually respect the rule of law and the dominant culture that we have. I think everybody is trying to get to that point, and I think everybody is trying to get to that place while winning elections along the way, which is not an easy thing to do, while winning national elections, national election winning majorities along the way. It's not an easy balancing act.
The Swedish government just struck a deal with Estonia about renting prison space over there, which will decrease costs and avoid a situation in which individuals who are due to serve their jail time are being released. So maybe that could be something for a new British government. Rent some space in North Africa or something. The last one to take the floor and ask Matt a question is Carlo Ciccioli from Italy.
Grazie.
Thank you. I simply like to share a thought with you and know your opinion, which begins with my own story. My political, I'm over 70, and all my past as a, in fact, I'm a psychiatrist. For 23 years, I was a psychiatrist in the public health system. 3 points, because problems are not born outside us. The problems begin with us. We have the problems. And then I have to think about external factors. The 3 points are the following, to be very brief. The first mission of any human being is to reproduce. That's to say, to give continuity to life. So the family. And when you read Genesis, that's what it's all about. This has been lost in the West. The West has a past. It's living through a very confused present, and it has no idea about the future. And then its sense of the end. That's the first thing it has to overcome. The second, still in the West, it's the sense of guilt. From a sense of pride in our past past centuries, we've moved to this sense of guilt, the sense of embarrassment regarding anything that we do. So we feel we have to be ashamed. So we have a sense of inferiority towards the world. The third point, and I'll draw to an end, is the fear of acting. That's to say, we're paralyzed vis-a-vis the system which has come about. Now, let me just comment very briefly what happened in my own region, the Marche, a small region in central Italy, 1.5 million people. 50 years ago, we won the regional elections. Then in September 2020, we won again. And we did so just a week ago. We also won. But once we won those elections, we realized we had to change things. They wanted to change laws, the apparatus. And obviously, I began that battle, and I found myself facing a significant part of my lineup, of my own coalition, saying, be careful, because otherwise we'll end up with the judges against us, the press against us, the unions against us. So we have to move from an idea that you can do to this idea of you can't do it. So this is symbolic for the West. You can do almost anything, yes. Even everyone seems to think they can do anything in our house. If a policeman defends themselves, he's arrested. If you injure a burglar in your home, then you're going to have problems. So perhaps we need to have a major cultural revolution, very aggressive. Not a peaceful one, very aggression. Now, obviously, when it comes to our thought, it's rather different. There we need to just throw out 200 years of prevailing political thought. Not all of it. It's not all bad. And 200 years which have been built up day by day and led to cultural aspects which have led to the ruin of the Western civilization. Now, these stages it's not a political fight. I think these things are essential if we're going to bring about positive change. What do you think?
Well, thank you for the question. To keep my answer brief, under instruction, the short answer is yes, we need to invest in action, and we need to believe that action and change are possible. That is what President Trump, I think, has given everybody in this room, which is proof of concept. You don't think we can change the universities? Look at America. You don't think we can control the borders? Look at America. You don't think we can reshape immigration policy? Look at America. You don't think we can reinvest in the working class and we can incentivize, if not force, globalist big business to look after workers? Look at America. I think the proof of concept has been delivered, and I think it is there. I think also, as I say, all of the things that keep many people perhaps in this room awake at night reflect specific political choices. People are demoralized. I agree with you. People are beset by a sense of bewilderment and loss and disillusionment. And I think many of the debates that we are having are also becoming civilizational, in the sense that we're no longer really talking about a government or a policy, but we are talking about the most fundamental question a society can ask, which is, can we survive? Can we endure? If these trends continue, are we still the we that we associate ourselves with? Are we still the same civilization? If you replace all of the parts of a ship, is it still the same ship? And I think it's that existential question that we are all tiptoeing around, we are all walking around. I said on social media not too long ago with regards to the UK, I said we probably have 2 general elections left to fundamentally push the country away from its current direction in a different direction, to which Elon Musk replied and said, no, you have one. You have one election in which to push against everything that has piled up over the last 30 years and move the dial in a different direction. And I think that sense of urgency is very real. It has to be practical. It has to be coherent. It has to be electorally compelling. It has to learn the lessons from other governments around the world, but it has to ultimately present a different set of political choices to voters to make it clear that a different reality is possible. They don't have to feel demoralized. They don't have to feel disillusioned. They don't have to feel embarrassed by who they are and by the nations from which they come. They can live in a culture of affirmation and believe in who they are. And the message, the three words that I think will determine the outcome of the next general election, and I'll be happy to return and see if I'm right in 2029 or 2030, are three words: believe in Britain. Those are the three words that I think will structure the campaign at the next general election. Forward-looking, optimistic, positive, affirmation. And I'll leave you to ponder that, and perhaps we can all ponder that over a glass or two. Thank you.
Which was the perfect bridge to what I'm about to say, because you're all very welcome to join our drinks reception starting in 3 minutes in Salon C2.1 in the canal area of the Vice building. So just some formal information. The next internal MPG meeting will take place on Wednesday, 26th of November, 2025. And thanks to all of you for coming here tonight. Thanks to the thousands of viewers on X for tuning in. And thank you, Dr. Goodwin, for coming to the European Parliament in Strasbourg to tell some truth about the state of the United Kingdom, Europe, and our Western civilization. And I would like to end with this paraphrase of the beautiful Polish national anthem: Europe is not yet lost. Thank you all for coming tonight.